Well, thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. And let's see if I can advance the slides and tell you what I am going to be talking about. Yes, everything seems to work. Well, let me say that it just really gives me great pleasure to be here today. And I have benefited already from the previous presentations. It's going to make it easier to talk a little bit about, some of the more technical things that come up in mine. And I can't help but love Eric's can-do approach to framing new ways of better measuring the economy, particularly the welfare that people achieve from digital goods. So let me begin. So what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to highlight the different, primarily two different approaches to measuring AI's impact on the economy. I'm also going to put a plug in for needing to include a full list of intangibles in any analysis of how the economy is going to change due to the application of AI. And in this way, I'll bring in a very recent paper that I've written, which is basically a intangibles augmented growth accounting approach to assessing the impact of AI. And my whole talk will deal with measurement. So let's go. So AI and productivity growth, a task approach versus growth accounting. Well, what do the available studies that we have sort of say about how much AI will affect productivity growth? Well, they vary very widely. According to a review by the OECD, estimates of AI's impact for the next decade range from 0.12 percentage points per year to 3.5 percentage points per year. And by the way, in the backup slides, there's a chart that sort of lists all of these studies that the OECD reviewed as of the time they wrote their paper, which was late 2023, early 2024. Our paper isn't in it because it just came out last month. The majority of the studies that they reviewed used task accounting. And most people, unless they work in this field, don't know what that is. Most people who do growth accounting don't necessarily know what that is. So my co-authors and I did take a deep dive into this to try to relate what we were finding with the task accounting approach. And that's pretty much the perspective that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And not all of it's in that paper. We can only write so much. So we have this sort of current approach that sort of really appeals to a lot of people, and it's taken analysts. It's appealing to a lot of analysts, and it really focuses on identifying worker tasks that can be automated using actually Gen AI in particular. And of course, in the past, the growth accounting approach that I'm talking about is an approach where you measure the impact of a new technology by evaluating the production and use effects of the capital that technology embodies. And this approach is summarized in a nice recent paper by Nick Crafts, where he talks about steam, electricity, and ICT, and you really get a nice historical sense of what that sort of macro approach gives you. But before I delve into it, I think I really have to say that um, that fundamentally, nobody sort of sits down and says, oh, well, task approach versus growth accounting is a totally different way to look at the world, in any sort of real substantive sense. But the real sort of contrast happens with uh, is between the view that task accounting takes, that technical change has to do with automation and the replacement of tasks, versus a view that what you get from technical change, the value creation, doesn't happen from people losing their jobs. Rather, it's systemic change, in the form of new business models and organization change. And then they really are two contrasting sort of views. I mean, you could say that systemic change is about, how new business models and changes in organization lead to a more capital intensive economy, and that's sort of what you're going to track. Whereas the task approach is talking about how much is really talking about how you move to a less labor intensive economy. And they are both sides of the same thing, but that's how things, that's really how they differ. Um, but anyway, but the methods that people use, task accounting has its own method, and there's the intangible augmented growth accounting, which if we want a macro estimate. And then, of course, you could always have a survey, as long as it's uh, trying to get at the direct effect and not the yes, no things that Diego just told us don't work. So what is the task approach? It's this, bottom up approach. And let's just sort of look at the end, forget the first four steps, and suppose you just look at the end and you see that you go from estimating a TFP gain to getting a gain in labor productivity. And you can see even there, they're using a growth accounting adjustment, the so-called Herodian adjustment of how much, total change in labor productivity is induced by um, a shift in the production function. So the real heart of it really comes in these in the first three steps, where you estimate you say how much of the total wage bill consists of tasks that are exposed to AI. And then you say, well, how much of that it can be profitably automated? And that's really Diego's adoption rate. And then you say, well, once they adopt it, I mean, how much are they really going to save? And somehow in all of that, remember, you start with tasks and then you end up with how much money you can save. And you have this conundrum that if you start off with the results that tell you that 8% of what economists do can be done away with, well, you don't necessarily fire 8% of economists. I mean, these things don't translate to jobs, and that's the richness of both the richness of the framework, but it's also the complexity and where a lot of assumptions come in. I've detailed Asimoglu's 2025 assumptions at the bottom, that where he says the impact on, in this 2025 paper, that the impact on labor productivity is 0.14 percentage points per year. Aghion and Brunel, just by using different assumptions in the first three stages there, like for instance, instead of 20% of the wage bill being exposed to AI, they say 60%. The adoption rate, they have it roughly twice as fast. The cost reduction, uh, they have, they say it's 40%. Anyway, you multiply out their numbers and you get something that's actually in excess of 1 percentage point per year on labor productivity. So it's not this approach can give you a wide range of estimates because it does rest on assumptions, where the key assumptions are those first three parameters that I just discussed. And let me just go through them real quick. I don't want to spend too much of my time on this, but I think it's important that everybody, understand how what is actually really a very rich framework is tough to implement. So where does the exposure measures come from? Well, there's this widely quoted study by Alejandro, Manny, Mishkin, and Rock, that's Dan Rock, that used the ONET descriptors of the tasks involved in 900 occupations. They used ChatGPT to determine if an LLM could decrease the time it took to complete the task. They set a bar of 50%, um, and um, and they came up with two measures, E1 and E2, where the first I would interpret as saying, using existing technology, what is on the shelf, um, uh, how, how exposed, they then list these tasks that would be exposed to being automated by AI. And then what was interesting to I and my co-authors in our growth accounting approach is that if you, I list just the general idea of what goes into the E2 measure, which is what's used in the task studies, which is described as they're telling the ChatGPT prompt, they're asking it if additional software could be developed on top of the LLM that could then reduce the time completed to to complete a task. And um, what uh, we list in our paper just the whole set of prompts that they use. And basically everyone starts with, if can software do this? Can additional software do that? It's all software, software, software. And so we say, oh, what they're talking about is software capital deepening in the solo world or in the growth accounting world. And sort of in terms of the analysis in the paper, we just took off from there. But just for your sake, I think and to understand why this ends up with a really small number, um, is we have to go to the adoption parameter. And there's very limited, so with the Alejandro study, it's all laid out there. If you want to develop your own E2 or even have more prompts, I mean, you would come up with different numbers than the 0.2. Um, but that's all like very, very clear. When it comes to adoption, there's one study that's used. Diego might find this interesting. And that's the one that talks about the adoption of how tasks were found cost effective to automate using computer vision AI. Computer vision AI sort of uh, launched on the scene in about 2012, I think. We have a 10-year history of that, and they found that by 2022, only 23% of the tasks um, were found to be caught that could have been automated by computer vision AI were. So that's where they get the adoption rate. And I have a little sidebar over here. Whoops. I have a little sidebar over here where I just asked, I was going to say where I asked Copilot, hey, how much of enterprise software is AI-enabled software. And they told me 23%. So I guess it's not a bad number. But that is forecast to exceed 40% in a short time from now. And then to sort of level off eventually before reaching 2050 in the early 30s, sort of the normal sort of curve. So this 23% does not reflect declining future costs that might boost the adoption rate, is the bottom line. I consider that a weak link in the study. And then the information on cost reduction, well, that just comes from aggregating a whole bunch of case studies. Well, I mean, they're in-depth empirical studies. Don't look at the details, but basically you take an average of all of that and you get 0.27. The reason why I'm not asking you to look at that in details, I'm going to give you an interpretation of what this needs to be consistent with what you might get using a growth accounting approach, and then we'll come back and sort of see what's really going on. Well, steps 1 and 2 seem to essentially yield the potential labor cost reduction due to task automation. In other words, it's coming up with a labor productivity estimate. And then if so, remembering that what Solo told us, or taught us, which is that a change in labor productivity can be decomposed into a contribution from TFP and a contribution from capital deepening, which is literally in the aggregate, the costs that it takes to achieve that increase in labor productivity. So there's the costless gain, which is the new tool that enables a worker to be hugely efficient, and then you need to sort of subtract off the cost of the capital that sort of got you there. So it's like they get an estimate of labor productivity and then they subtract off the cost to sort of get at TFP. And that's the sense in which you have a relationship to, in a macro sense, to what growth accounting would get you to. But I would say that I think you'd have to say that that correspondence is pushing it. They certainly don't talk in those terms, and I've read most of these papers. I mean, rather they're talking about this sort of what I started off talking about, which is that okay, ChatGPT tells you that 8% of what economists do can be automated. But how do you map that into job space is complex. And the cost savings that you get is not merely the value of the 8% of economists' wages. In fact, it gets reduced quite a bit. So I think that's a natural bridge to considering the systemic change view, because how you get from 8% of economist tasks to, let's say, 8% cost reduction, again, isn't just by laying off economists, it's probably by rearranging the work that they do. And here I think the McKinsey has survey evidence that's highly relevant. And if you look at this chart that I have here that I've copied from their 2023 report, and don't necessarily focus on the billions of dollars that they're talking about being saved, but rather the relative position of those billions of dollars. You can see by the bright blue dots that 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 AI is affecting mostly intangible business functions. And I would highlight their product R&D. And then we also see software engineering for product R&D. And we have then we have various marketing things. And so from all of this, I think when you look at it from this point of view, it is consistent with the view that technology does lead to some organizational change. But I think I've tried to argue that you can have this view of technology and approximate it by looking at how the economy is going to be less labor intensive, as well as looking at it as how it will be more capital intensive. And you can choose which you think is, suits the needs that you have. But I think if you go back to this emphasis on product development that you see from the McKinsey result, it also tells you that AI is an invention in the method of invention, as well as a general purpose technology. And that is something that the task approach can't model. It would just be smooshed into that cost reduction or less of a cost reduction type of effect. And it is something that the intangibles augmented growth accounting framework can tell you. And here I think the challenge is, how can you develop an approach that tells you what the impact of AI is or approximates it, as well as allows you to model AI not just as a GPT, but also as an IMI. And that's why, in homage to Zvi Griligus, I have this hybrid corn picture down here. So this is what our paper, and I should have listed it here. The authors are Filippo Bontadini, myself, Jonathan Haskell, and Cecilia Jonah Lacinio. And it's just called AI as an IMI, implications for productivity in the US and the UK and Europe. And I'm only going to talk about the US right now. So what we do is we adapt the upstream, downstream approach that we have set out in previous works, which just in simple words is like a multi-sector model, or fundamentally a two-sector model, where there's a knowledge producing sector, and then there's a downstream sector that's a knowledge using sector. And the idea is the upstream sector produces intangibles that are used in the downstream sector. So that's where you get the sort of the basic intangibles entering into the production function. But it doesn't preclude AI as an IMI, and the mechanism for modeling that for AI-enabled tangibles. In other words, it's sort of, how does Waymo do what it does? Well, it does it through, I would say, software. And if you had to sort of boil it down to one word. So we proceed by treating AI as a breakthrough in software creation. In other words, a different way of creating software, of producing software, i.e. by machine learning, as opposed to being handcrafted. And that the use of AI technologies and upstream productions can be therefore captured by software R&D. And our notion of software R&D is as an area of technology, not just what's done in the software industry. So the R&D for autonomous vehicles would appear in an industry framework as motor vehicle R&D, but rather really is embedded software R&D. And it turns out the U.S. National Science Foundation, which designs the R&D surveys for the United States, has collected data by technology focus for a very long time. And it has included software in that group of categories since 2001 or two. So what I did was develop that series in a fashion consistent with the business R&D series that's in the national accounts. And it's really a stunning, it's a rather stunning result, where first of all, if you look at the blue bars in the chart, which show the nominal expenditure on business R&D investment in the U.S. national accounts, you can see how it picks up in total in 2017. And not only is that because the R&D, the software R&D is picking up, but also because it's picking up as a share. So that by the latter 2 years there, we have software R&D accounting for 45%, well, 44, 43% of all of business R&D in the United States, which is really a stunning number if you think about it. But if you think about it further, if you know that the value of this is going to capture all the costs that are incurred to develop, new AI software, like, all the data processing and the computing and even the electricity costs that went into developing these new LLMs. Of course, this thing had to surge because all of that costs a lot of money. So what do? We treat software, the regular purchases of software products as software. We define software capital to be the sum of regular software and software R&D, and we get some pretty stunning results. First of all, I think I want to direct your attention to line 1 and the difference between column 1 and column 2, where from 2012 to 2017, you had a fairly low rate of labor productivity growth. But by 2017 to 2024, labor productivity growth in the United States actually averaged at about its historical average going back, well, at least to 1947, and I think you could even go back much further than that. Now, that's not to say that we have made up for the productivity slowdown that started in, let's say, 2005 in the United States, but that by the period 2017 to 2024, at least we were chugging along at the historical pace that labor productivity has achieved over a long period of history. I think that's just, you don't see that in the other advanced countries. So I think we have to bear that in mind. The same is true for total factor productivity growth, which is on line 4. It averaged 0.9% per year over this period, which is just shy of, well, the 1.1% average, according to official BLS statistics since 1948. So these are pretty strong numbers. Again, they don't make up for the loss in level in the productivity slowdown, but the pace is strong. And the bottom line is that software capital its production and its use accounted for half of that. So that's line 2, where we see that it really picked up um, and um, uh, and accounts for really half of the acceleration that happened in labor productivity from beginning in 2017. So, you could stretch this and sort of say, we had some real breakthroughs in AI, in software, in other words, in software production, and in software R&D. There's a reason why the software R&D started to explode. It the algorithms that are used to develop the LLMs became, there were just several inventions that occurred, and it sped up the development. And I think that's what we're seeing here in these figures. Again, somebody may think I'm pushing that, but I think you can't conclude anything other than that AI has had a significant impact on U.S. productivity growth in recent years. So that's really the first part. That's the main historical backward-looking sort of results in our paper. And again, it's based upon this argument of of um, of AI of AI showing through as a different way of producing software, and AI also as a invention and the method of invention, and that the use of AI technologies is embodied in that software measure that I showed you. But what about the future? Um, so there's a couple things that,
Sorry, Carol, to interrupt.
oh
We
yes,
need to wrap up quick. Well, I'm very sorry
I'm
to
on my second to
interrupt.
last slide. So this is sort of it. So may I just have like a minute or
Yes,
more?
please.
Okay.
1 minute.
All
1 minute,
we
no
want to
more than.
do here is assume that all intangibles, not just software and software product R&D, are based on AI agents, and this is sort of like um, Diego's AI being used in all these sort of different functions. And the chart on the left just is a calibration of what the size of intangible investment is relative to market sector gross value added, and you can see that it's approaching 20%. And so we're saying, well, just suppose that 15% of the economy um, is is um, is being produced by AI technologies, then how much of an effect that's going to have on productivity growth is in this table over here, and it depends upon what the relative productivity advantage is of this sort of upstream output. In other words, what the productivity advantage is of using these intangible assets in downstream production once they're produced by AI agents. And we've already, in the historical results we saw, the productivity advantage of software and software R&D was, in a relative sense, I mean, it was close to 3 percentage points more than uh, the overall economy. Um, so if we look conservatively at the third column and take 15% rather than 20% as the share of output that could be produced via AI, you get a 1% per year contribution of AI to labor productivity growth in a sort of steady growth path. It could be more, and I could talk about that or less, but what I think I want to conclude with a thought by saying that I don't think these US productivity results are a bubble. The chart on the right shows the industry distribution where the width of the industry is the size of the industry, and the US is being held down by negative contributions in manufacturing, finance, and retail, all of which are among the leading adopters of AI, and I just don't think there's any cost savings that have shown through yet. And so I think there's a lot to come there. And the other reason why the economy really isn't a bubble, unlike the UK, you can see that there's a lot of other industries that are contributing to positively and strongly positively to US productivity growth. And I think people forget about that when they talk about a bubble, or, a digital bubble. I just don't think that. I think the idea is that yes, the US economy is dependent on its digital sector, but everything else is tooling along reasonably well also. So that's really pretty much all this slide. This is just a summary of everything that I've said. I don't want to go through it. But I hope you got something from basically the two different topics that I talked about. And thank you very much for indulging me the extra couple minutes.